in a room. And now Sebastian's just told me they've just surpassed 180 employees and have taken up 4 more floors at 401 Broadway. And can you just talk a little bit about the mission of Artsy to make all the world's art accessible online, and why do you think Artsy's been so inspiring to people in the art world, particularly young people?
Well, first, thank you, Christine, for having me, and all of you. It's awesome to be here, and our company is primarily been successful because of the incredible people we've been able to hire, and a lot of those people have come through this program and the Christie's program. So this is not just recruiting Christine, but recruiting more broadly to the kind of best and brightest in the room. I think why Artsy has been inspiring is a little bit more like a question for you or others. I think what has made the company successful in this industry is a kind of very different approach than what others have taken. So the traditional internet model is it's essentially kind of low-level disruption. So you find an industry, you find inefficiencies, and you say you're going to replace some part of it. And Artsy has very deliberately from the beginning taken a different approach, which is we are rather than going to be a vertical disruptor that completely replaces part of the industry. So say we're going to be an online auction house, or we're going to be an online gallery, and we've instead said we're going to be a horizontal platform that partners with industry to help them reach a larger audience. And I think that, and combined with maybe a real kind of arts and tech focus, are probably the 2 key pillars that have allowed us to grow quickly.
That's very interesting that you describe Artsy as a horizontal platform rather than a vertical. One of the challenges that I remember about Artsy was building those partnerships early on. So for many of you who don't know, I started off at Artsy establishing relationships with museums, and then I branched out into helping with benefit auctions, and then eventually launching the first segment of commercial auctions. But how did Artsy, as a startup that didn't really have a brand, didn't really have much cachet, build partnerships with some of the most important galleries like Gagosian and Zwirner and others, and auction houses when you're just a startup?
So I think certainly a lot of luck involved, but I think there is, at the beginning, it's a lot of conversations and kind of this idea. The early days, we were fortunate that we had one of our investors who introduced us to Wendy Murdoch and Dasha Zakova, and they were actually kicking around an idea to do an online arts magazine with Larry Gagosian, and we somehow convinced them that instead of launching this separate thing, they should invest in our totally unknown company at the time. And that was it was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it absolutely put us on the map in a somewhat obnoxious way, in that we had absolutely no product, and there was, we had this idea that by putting out the fact that Larry Gagosian and others were involved in the company, it would kind of get attention, which it certainly did. But we didn't anticipate how long it would take to actually have a product. And so we had probably a couple of years where you had, certainly this undercurrent of like, is this a lot of hype, but oh, I'm interested because there's a lot of people involved. And probably that air of mystery, I think at the beginning, helps to make a kind of crazy, audacious mission, like putting the art world online, slightly less threatening to people. Like, it's a little bit, if you're saying like, we're going out and we're gonna build from the beginning the largest marketplace for buying and selling art, I think that's a more threatening thing than and it was very genuine at the beginning. There was some idea that we would ultimately monetize it with people buying and selling art, but it really was very much about accessibility. And we began, as Christine knows as well as I do, having a lot of conversations with museum directors and with gallery owners and with auction houses, etc. It was very much these like one conversation at a time. The art world is this super fragmented industry. It's an industry that's super relationship driven, and it was a lot of like one person is in and then someone else would be like, I'm not interested, and so you'd kind of like sit down with them for 2 hours and talk them through it, and 70% of the time they'd be like, okay, you seem like a nice person, but I'm still not gonna do this, come back to me in a year. And you'd get the occasional person who'd be like, what the hell? And then you lived for those like what the hell moments, people who like a little bit just took a chance on you. And we definitely remember the people who kind of said what the hell. And then you start, over time, you start having people, I remember having a conversation with a major, one of the major New York gallery owners, who kind of didn't really go anywhere. It was one of these like, okay, thank you for this update on Artsy, go back. And this was still, where like all our KPIs were flat enough that my wife was like, when are you gonna go back and get a real job? And this person, kind of called me back, I don't know, I think it was like 2-3 years later. This was probably 2015, and she says to me, Sebastian, I think you're right. I think this internet thing is not a fad. And so it's like, let's talk about getting on Artsy. And so that industry is very, very different than a lot of the rest of the world, right? Even just the idea that you would put your art online. At the beginning, we had people who would say to us like, hey, everyone is gonna copy my images. We built really sophisticated technology and spent a lot of time so that every artwork on Artsy at the beginning was, when it was uploaded, it was split into hundreds of little files, and each of the files would be like on the browser, like reconstructed, and like invisibly watermarked, and all these things to kind of reassure people. And of course, you can actually screenshot things and get reasonably good things. But there was a lot of effort into this idea of like, my images should not go out there. And the kinds of things that gave you hope at that time was around the time that I partnered with Carter and we were launching Artsy. My son was born, and he's now 6, about to turn 7. And I remember seeing him at like age 2, swiping the TV screen, and looking at him and being like, he's gonna be fine buying art online, right? Like, I'm sure, like, it might take a generation, but we know he'll be good. And then the question is like, that's like, I'm a mathematician by training, and so it's a little bit like, where it's gonna end, and you know where you're at now, and there's some path there. So it's just a matter of how much time is end, 3 years, 7 years, 15 years. Of course, the problem is that you have limited money, and so if N is 15 years, then you're probably going to be bankrupt before you get there. But it's definitely, if you look on the flip side at the auction houses that are the big kind of existing players in the art world, they've been around 250 years, so they've had 10 generations to do this, and I think if we can make an impact in one generation, I'll feel pretty good.
So what was this turning point? Because I joined Artsy when it was 30 people. There were a few hundred galleries on there. There weren't any museums yet. Artsy hadn't launched auctions. Artsy didn't have any art fairs on there yet. I mean, it was pretty early days. So when was this transition, when Artsy really made that turning point and had a foothold in the art market in a way that was very different from those early days? Because I feel like it happened in the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a series of different steps. Clearly convincing you after many, many conversations to join Artsy was an important part. Yeah. I literally would, Christine was this like ongoing conversation, because we could get, like, I could have a conversation even as this like nerdy mathematician turned art world person. I could go and talk to a gallery, an auction house, an art fair. The museum people were like, no, you're not really one of us. Like, it was very clear that we needed someone who kind of from that world. And Christine, I enlisted like John Elderfield, who was an early advisor to Artsy, to try and convince Christine. I would like walk, I would say like, all right, I want to check in with Christine, and it's like a 10-minute walk to the subway, and I'd spend like half an hour outside the subway. This was before you could talk on the phone on the subway platform. Spend half an hour being like, no, Christine, this is like, you're not gonna regret it. And she did, to her credit, she came to me after the first happy hour, saying like, Sebastian, I'm so glad I did this. Like, I was gonna make a huge mistake not coming. So.
Well, it was a really interesting thing, because this was, if you go back, 5 years, Artsy was a risk. It was this risky thing, and I was vice president at Art Store, which is a nonprofit organization created by the Andrew Mellon Foundation. I had 5 departments under me, I had 23 staff. Like, it was a very stable job. And so going to a startup with 30 people was this huge risk. And I remember this conversation with you, Sebastian, and also with Carter Cleveland, the founder and the CEO of Artsy, where Carter took me up to the roof of 401 Broadway and was telling me about this vision to make all the world's art available online. And I was like, that's crazy, that's never gonna happen. And then Carter said, but don't you wanna try? And you have to have faith. And I was like, all right, you have faith, I'll just work for you, and let's see what happens. And so it happened because it was this combination of people who had faith and vision, and people who really wanted to have that faith and vision. And I really wanted that vision to happen, because I think what Artsy does, it's not only about, for me, it wasn't only about the commercial possibilities, but the educational possibilities. Because what happened was a lot of curators and scholars started using Artsy because it's the one place where you could, for example, do research on Robert Motherwell, and you'd not only see all of the museums with Robert Motherwell, but you'd also see all the works that ended up in private hands. So you'd get to see what was for sale. And we learned that the Daedalus Foundation, which is Robert Motherwell's foundation, they were using Artsy every day to assemble their catalog raisonné. So it was that combination, I think that big vision that you and Carter had, as well as the board, to really unify the art world and make that information transparent. So we had some alumni speaking to us earlier before you got here about online and what the online platforms do to make the art world transparent. And that's really something that Artsy really spearheaded in some ways, I think.
Yeah, and I think to go back to your question of kind of like what are like key turning points, I think one, certainly being able to get big museums was an important piece. I think the art fairs were really big because we had this idea